Hey guys, I'm Coach Trnnka. Again, happy National Gymnastics Month. Today we're going to be talking about the biomechanics of a round-off. I did do a video last week explaining how to do a round-off. This particular video is doing the science behind the round-off, so going into the biomechanics, the kinematics, the kinetics, all that fun stuff so we can get better round-offs. A round-off is one of the most used skills in gymnastics because it is the most effective way to switch from moving forward to moving backwards without losing any momentum. According to the law of conservation of momentum, the momentum will remain constant where there are no other forces acting on the body other than gravity. Therefore, when the gymnast uses a round-off, they can switch from tumbling forwards to tumbling backwards without losing any momentum, which helps the gymnast to maintain their momentum while they are switching direction. A round-off is typically started with a step or a hurdle. When used properly, the hurdle can give the gymnast the needed powerful force and speed to complete the round-off or any other tumbling skill that starts with one dominant foot. The hurdle is a type of step hop that the gymnast will use before performing this skill. Here I have shown both the step hurdle and the power hurdle. The step hurdle can also be done after a run, as seen in many tumbling. After the hurdle, the gymnast will reach his or her hands to the ground with the second hand pointing towards the first in order to reduce elbow injury, as I am showing you here. And the goals of biomechanics are to reduce risk of injury while improving performance. Once the hands reach the ground, the gymnast is completely upside down, almost in a handstand, and makes a 180-degree turn. So instead of moving forward, the gymnast is now moving backwards. From the handstand, the gymnast snaps the legs down and rebounds immediately. The round-off will greatly influence any tumbling skill that succeeds it, which is why it's so important to improve the round-off. When doing the hurdle, the dominant foot is brought up and the arms swing up close to the ears. The gymnast will produce more power in the hurdle if this is done aggressively, resulting in more power for the round-off, and the round-off will then have a larger velocity and higher kinetic energy. The hurdle will determine the rest of the round-off as it is the initial means of the energy needed to perform the work of the round-off with as much power as possible. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed, merely transferred. It is important to use this hurdle to transfer the energy to kinetic energy so that the round-off can have a higher velocity, so that throughout the sequence of tumbling skills followed by the round-off, the gymnast can pick up speed. The simple step hop with the swing of the arms around back and then up straight to the ears will provide the means whereby the gymnast will then be able to perform the following skills. At the end of the hurdle, the gymnast is in the air with the dominant leg bent and the dominant foot flexed and the non-dominant foot straight down towards the ground. The arms are straight, squeezing next to the gymnast's ears. This gives the gymnast a potential energy position to go into their round-off. From this potential energy position, the gymnast will let first the straight non-dominant leg touch the ground, then the dominant one will reach forward in a type of lunge. From the lunge, the gymnast pushes off the dominant foot while raising the non-dominant leg straight and lowering the arms to the ground. All right, let's go ahead and talk about kinetics a little bit with the round-off. So we're going to start with Newton's first law. And I mentioned previously, but Newton's first law is that an object in motion will remain in motion unless acted upon by an opposite force. So the gymnast in the round-off will remain in motion until acted upon by a force. The force in the round-off that would stop the gymnast from remaining in motion would be either the ground or gravity or those internal muscles. All right, so let's move on to Newton's second law. So Newton's second law says that the greater the force that is created, the greater the acceleration. So how this is going to apply to the round-off is that the more force the gymnast produces going into the round-off, the more she'll be able to accelerate and thus be able to have those accelerating following tumbling skills after that round-off. The force is mostly created through that hurdle, which is why it's so important to have. And Newton's third law states that the ground offers an equal and opposite force to the force that the gymnast applies. So as the gymnast applies force to the ground in her hands and then her feet in the rebound, that's what helped the gymnast to come back up out of it, so she's not stuck there on her hands or stuck on the ground, so she can continue using that momentum and energy, which we'll talk about in just a second, to be able to successfully complete the round off. Energy is conserved and cannot be lost nor created. The energy from the gymnast is mostly kinetic because the gymnast is moving through the round off. But as I mentioned previously, in that hurdle, there is that potential energy right before the hands reach the ground. The work is the summation of the change in energy, so from the potential to the kinetic energy. We could calculate that if we want. I'm not going to in this video here. And then power is the faster time rate for doing the work. Center of gravity is changing constantly because the body shape is changing and can even be located outside of the body at times during this round off. The gymnast can manipulate the center of gravity by changing shape to help the rotational process and thus get more power into further skills after the round. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to kinematics. So let's start with distance. So distance is going to be how far the gymnast travels in the round off. So this will change from gymnast to gymnast. Obviously, height is going to affect how far you can travel. If you're a shorter gymnast versus a taller gymnast, the taller gymnast is just going to move farther because they can. But typically speaking, you do want your tumbling passes to be long. So you do want to make sure that you're traveling a good distance. All right, so speed and velocity are the same thing, which is how quickly you're moving. And it is the most influential factor for range, height, and time of flight. So if you have a good velocity, a good speed in that round off, you're going to be able to get greater height out of that rebound, which will influence your following tumbling after that round off. Acceleration is your change in speed, so how you're picking up speed and able to accelerate, which is important for, again, those skills following round off. Throughout the round off, the body can be considered as a projectile as it is moving in a trajectory through the air. So gravity is affecting your round off, which is negative 9.81 meters per second squared. And this will affect your time in the air. Vertical velocity is greater at takeoff and takes greater time in the air. And your height of release gives you greater velocity at takeoff and greater height. If the angle is greater than or less than 45 degrees, the distance covered in flight is less. And this is because 45 degrees is halfway between vertical and horizontal, and so that way you get both components. If the angle release is too high, then the distance is not going to be very great either. And if the angle release is too low, then the projectile, in this case the body, will be in the air for less time and not gain as much distance. Angle going into the round off will affect your trajectory. The optimal angle going into a round off is between 37 and 43 degrees. This is going to be lower than what's considered normal for projectiles because the air resistance of the body at takeoff point is higher and there is a higher height of release because of the hurdle before, which still increases the distance covered in the flight phase. The greater the velocity at takeoff, the greater the horizontal velocity and the greater the horizontal displacement. The vertical velocity will be changing throughout the round off due to gravity, but the horizontal velocity should remain constant unless, of course, that gymnast is using acceleration. Velocity depends on the force generated from when you're starting that round off. However much force you're creating in that hurdle will affect your velocity at takeoff, and your maximum velocity at takeoff will affect your range, your height, and your time in flight. Also, in order to improve the range, height, and time in flight, you want to make sure you're reaching that optimal angle at takeoff, which we talked about previously. When direction constantly changes, velocity changes, and this produces acceleration. Acceleration is directed radially toward the center of the circle. This circle, as we mentioned in the center of gravity, is constantly changing as the body is constantly changing position. Tangential acceleration changes in the magnitude of velocity, but not in its direction. It is directly related to the angular acceleration and linked to increase or decrease in velocity, but not direction. The greater the angular acceleration, the larger the tangential acceleration, and vice versa. The smaller the radius, the smaller the tangential acceleration for a given angular acceleration. If a gymnast is smaller, therefore, they will have smaller tangential. Centripetal acceleration is related to the direction of the velocity, but not the magnitude. Centripetal acceleration has the magnitude equal to the square of the body's speed along the curve divided by the radius. So again, the size of the gymnast will be affecting this. It is the force causing acceleration directed toward the center of the circle. Tangential and centripetal acceleration are perpendicular and independent of one another. Let's talk about some factors that modify the action of the round-off. We have the friction of the joints, the tension of the ligaments and the muscles, and the bone and joint structure. The synovial fluid decreases friction. Synovial fluid is found in the shoulders. Shoulder movement in the round-off is used in that hurdle as those arms are doing a shoulder extension movement coming up to those ears, and then again as they are blocking off the ground coming back to the feet. Ligaments are like linear tensile springs that quantify the joint contact pressure distribution and the tension of the ligaments and muscles. I'll be talking briefly about the main muscles used in the round-off. Many muscles are used in the round-off. The quads and the glutes are the main muscles used for landing the round-off. The muscles used for squeezing the legs together when the gymnast reaches her hands are the adductors, the gracilis, and the pectineus. To point the toes and to jump in that rebound, the gymnast uses her gastrocnemius, her soleus, her peroneus longus, and her extensor digitorum. The abdominals are used in everything the gymnast does, and the gymnast is always squeezing those muscles. Many arm and back muscles are also used for the round-off. The main ones involved are the trapezius, the latissimus dorsi, the teres, both major and minor, the rhomboideus, the levator scapulae, the rotator cuff muscles, the triceps, the biceps, and the choriocobrachialis. So here is an image of all of the muscles that a gymnast will use when performing a round-off. As you can see, again, there are a lot. We use all parts of the body, as there are a lot of different muscle actions involving the arms as you're swinging those up and then blocking off again, the leg muscles as you're pushing to get into that round-off, squeezing the legs together, pushing off in the landing, the abs for everything, and the arms as well. Well, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed learning about the biomechanics, kinematics, kinetics of a round-off. This is not everything you can learn about the biomechanics of a round-off, but it is a good starting point. I will be listing my references, and I'll catch you next time.